So I want to talk about the real beginnings of the civil rights movement as we know it. And I'm going to start with a familiar story that you all have been told and know. A woman gets on to a bus in Montgomery and she sits down. And in those days, if a white person wanted the seat, then you had to give up your seat to the white person. So this woman sits down, she's very tired. The bus driver says, "I need that seat." She said, "It's my constitutional right to sit in this seat." The bus driver calls the police. The police escort the woman off of the bus. Her name is Claudette Colvin. 9 months before Rosa Parks, Claudette Colvin, 15-year-old child, Birmingham bus in Alabama, did not give up her seat for a white woman. Now I want to talk a little bit about Claudette, who she is and how she came to be and why she was forgotten. When she was 4 years old, she was in a general store and she was in line, and a young white boy came up and cut her in line, and then a bunch of other boys followed, and they're giggling and they're looking at her and they're laughing, and she doesn't know why. And at one point, one of the white boys says, let me see, and puts up his hand and asks her to put up her hand, and she puts up her hand and he touches her hand, and they fall out laughing. They start laughing hysterically. Claudette's mother walks up to Claudette and the boys and smacks Claudette across the face. She says, "Don't you know you're not supposed to touch them?" The white boy's mother looked and nodded in approval. And that's when Claudette realized that you are not supposed to touch white people and that she is different and things are not the same for her. Well, fast forward, Claudette is a very, very curious person. She asks a lot of questions. She is very smart. She prays fervently. When her and her sister Delphine go to bed, Delphine just crosses and gets in the bed as fast as possible. And Claudette asks God for everything to protect everyone, everything she could think of, every bird she saw, every tree, every person in her life. And she spends as much time until she feels she's done. She's a tomboy. She loves climbing trees. She also worries about normal things that black girls worry about in those days and to this day, about straightening their hair because straighter hair is accepted as good hair. Now, when Claudette was 12, her sister Delphine, who she prayed with on her bedside, comes down with polio, and she dies on her 13th birthday. This is devastating for Claudette, and she tells her mom that she's prayed to God and asked God, why would he take her away? Why? How could this happen? And her mother says, "You know what, Claudette? I've prayed for Delphine's deliverance because I did not want her to live in this world in that way, paralyzed. And I prayed that God would take her and deliver her from this world." And Claudette says, "I would have done anything to protect my sister. I would have gone to nursing school and become a nurse and taken care of her every day." This is Claudette Colvin. The turning point for activism for Claudette is when her classmate, Jeremiah Reeves, is accused of raping a white woman, and the police coerce him to confess, and 2 courts uphold the death sentence for him at 16. After this, Claudette realizes that worrying about good hair makes no sense when black people have no rights. She goes on February of 1955, and she has 2 amazing teachers, and they're doing Negro History Week. Now, these teachers have taught her about Black history throughout the school year, but this week is dedicated specifically to empowering her and having her learn about her people before enslavement, the rich history that exists outside of the soil of the United States, and also the injustice that exists, the groundless injustice that she is witnessing, and it emboldens her. She feels like she is learning, she's understanding, and realize that the world is unjust and it's not fair for black people. Now, March 2nd, she gets out of school early and she gets on the bus. Before I tell you about her getting on the bus, I want to give you some context. There was an ordinance in 1900 in Montgomery that actually said that if you are sitting in a seat, you do not have to give up your seat for a white person if there is no empty seat. That was the law. The bus drivers in the bus company did not care about that law. And if they asked for the seat, black people learned to give up the seat. A woman named Epsy Worthy, who refused to pay the transfer fare, was chased off by the bus driver afterwards, after she got off, and assaulted. And he started punching her. She was arrested and charged with disturbing the peace. A man named Brooks gets on in 1952, and he puts his dime in, and the the bus driver asks him to go around the back, to not walk through the front. And he says, "I'd rather walk." And he asks for his dime back, and the bus driver says no. And he calls the police, and the police come on and try to escort him off. And he says, "I want my dime." The policeman shoots him. He dies of his wounds, and the coroner rules it justifiable homicide because he was resisting arrest. This is the climate in which Claudette Colvin gets onto a bus on March 5th, 1955, sits in her seat with her classmates. After a few stops, notices a white woman standing in her 40s, not elderly, not incapacitated in any way, and she is looking to sit down, clearly. Claudette decides that she has learned enough history to empower herself, to know her rights. She knows about the 1900 ordinance and says she is not going to get up from that seat. The bus driver notices, looks back, says, "I need those seats." Her two classmates get up and move to the back. Claudette does not move. She's sitting on the window. The bus driver looks back again and says, "Are you going to move?" She says, "It is my constitutional right to sit in this seat. I paid my fare just like her." A white man on the bus says, "You must move from those seats." And one of Claudette's black schoolmates says, "She ain't got to do nothing but stay black and die." Now, obviously the bus driver was fed up. He stops at the station and pulls in a transport policeman. A transport policeman comes in, says Claudette needs to move. Claudette says, "It is my constitutional right to sit in this seat." The transport policeman goes back to the bus driver and says, "Actually, there's nothing I can do. It's not within my jurisdiction to arrest her." Claudette thinks that's it. She sighs a breath of relief. The bus goes on to the next stop. At the next stop, two police officers come on board. They come on board and they say, "Who is she?" And the bus driver says, "That thing back there, I've had problems with her before." That's what he said. He called her a thing. They walk back to her and they say, "Are you going to get off the bus?" Claudette lowers her head and begins to cry because she knows it's wrong to talk back to white people. And she says, "It is my constitutional right to sit on this bus, in this seat I paid my fare." The cops snatch her up, her books fly onto the ground. She carry her back, she's screaming. As she's screaming, "It is my constitutional right, it is my constitutional right, it is my constitutional right." They kick her as they take her to the cop car. They put her in the back of the cop car. They put the cuffs on her in the back of the cop car. One of the cops sit in the back with her in the cop car. Claudette starts to say the Lord's Prayer over and over and over. In the meantime, the cops are driving her around in the wrong direction. And they're intimidating her. They're calling her nigger bitch. They're making fun of her skin tone. They're trying to guess her bra size. All of this to basically show her that she made a big mistake standing up to white people. They drive all around the town. They book her. They take her not to the jail where she was booked, but to another adult jail in another part of town. Claudette said the scariest sound she ever heard were those jail doors closing, and she was alone in that adult jail cell. So be it. They bail her out. Her family contacts Edgar Nixon, who used to run the Montgomery NAACP. He was the chairman. He forms a committee to talk to the bus company and the local government. And one of the people the person he taps to be on this committee is a relatively unknown preacher, 26-year-old, named Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. This will be the beginning of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s career. So they go to trial, and Fred Gray is her lawyer. But what they do is they have witnesses, the police officers, and two written testimonies from white people who are on the bus who say the police officers are the most upstanding citizens. They did nothing wrong. They were calm, and Claudette was violent and aggressive, and they did what they had to do to keep the peace. There were black witnesses that they ignored because you can't testify against white people in these times. And the judge comes back and rules her guilty of assaulting a police officer, disturbing the peace, and violating segregation law. At 15, she's sentenced to probation and signed as a ward of the state. Now, we needed Claudette Colvin to have a case and plead not guilty in order to challenge the constitutionality of the segregation laws. But the problem is, after all of this happens, Claudette, in this mess of a case, in this hurt and the community turning on her, she meets a married man who takes advantage of her position and ends up becoming pregnant by him. So now we have a black 15-year-old, dark-skinned, unwed mother-to-be, and the NAACP decides that she cannot be the face of this movement. We cannot put this woman in court to win this case. 9 months later, December 2nd, 1955, Rosa Parks, who was the secretary for Edgar Nixon, gets on the bus, refuses to give up her seat. 3 days later, December 5th, the Montgomery bus boycott is born. It would last for 381 days. Now, what stopped the Montgomery bus boycott? Fred Gray, her lawyer, had gathered her with 3 other defendants to take the case to federal court to challenge the segregation laws and the bus laws in Birmingham. Now, Claudette takes a hand in starting the civil rights movement as we know it in 1955, and she takes a huge part in ending the bus boycott that began the civil rights movement, the long, long fight that we are in right now. After this, Claudette receives not one phone call from Edgar Nixon, from Fred Gray, from Rosa Parks, from Dr. Martin Luther King. She's shunned by the community. All she has is her immediate family. She moves on with her life and she does not talk about it. She moves to New York. She moves to the Bronx. She becomes a nurse, just like she said she would after her sister died. There is a street in the Bronx called Claudette Way. Now here's the problem, and here's the thing to think about. Why did the NAACP, did the black community, need someone other than Claudette to represent the movement and the desire for justice? What about this culture and society makes certain people of certain standing unfit to represent justice and equality and liberation for the underclass of this community, of this country? Rosa Parks was light-skinned, she was married, she was stable. Everyone has embraced Rosa Parks, and Rosa Parks is a civil rights leader, to be clear. She worked with NAACP for a long time. She's deserving of accolades. But what we're dealing with here is what's called respectability politics. You have to be a certain kind of respectable in order for us to grant you liberation and freedom. Now, I'm supposed to give you a prompt to look inside yourself and to consider what it means and how you evaluate this and how you can battle this cycle and this culture that tells you that Elijah is less deserving of death than George. Do you understand what that means? The good kid, the good boy with no criminal record, the sweet boy, for some reason is less deserving and is more tragic. It's all tragic. And there should be no one person who cannot represent the underclass who is not worthy, who would show you that they're worthy of liberation. What can you do to break that cycle in your life? If you're hiring, you're walking on the street, and the people that you evaluate, do you evaluate them aligning with whiteness or humanity? That's it.